do think in the business world, they are hungry for women at all levels, which is why I think Girls with Impact serves a really important void. Companies are hungry for women up and down the talent pipeline, and companies of all backgrounds are really hungry for ready talent on day one.
Welcome back to the Women on the Move podcast. I'm your host, Sam Saperstein. In this episode, I'm speaking with Jennifer Openshaw, the CEO and founder of Girls with Impact, an online business education platform for the next generation. Jennifer's journey is rooted in her own life story, starting her first job at 14 to building her career that spans Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and Main Street. We'll discuss how her diverse experiences have shaped her leadership style and her passion for advancing girls. Also, how Girls with Impact empowers the next generation of women leaders. Jennifer, welcome to the Women on the Move podcast. Thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, it's so great to be here, Sam.
So we're going to get into your wonderful organization, Girls with Impact. But I want to talk about, first of all, your career and how it is unfolded. You've had a really diverse set of experiences in your career. You've been at Silicon Valley and Wall Street and Main Street. So tell us about your career over time, sort of the big milestones and how you actually made it from step to step.
Well, I think, Sam, like a lot of people, I was shaped by my circumstances. You know, my mom found herself suddenly divorced with 3 kids. I was 5. She had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And she didn't have a formal education. So she ended up working 2 full-time jobs as a waitress. And I remember those moments when, paying the bills would be tough. When my mischievous little brother would climb into her wallet and take, quarters, but that was her tip money from the night before. And I think all of those memories had a huge impact on me. And at the age of 7 or so, I was actually babysitting my brothers until about 11 or 12 at night, if you can believe it.
Yeah.
Many parents would never think of doing that. And when I was about 12 years old, I had this sort of epiphany. I was riding my navy blue Schwinn bike home from school, and I was in the middle of the street and, sort of looking out ahead. And I sort of had this vision that, I wanted to do big things in my life. I did not want to find myself in the same precarious financial situation as my mother, but I had this kind of final thought, which was I had this sense that it was going to be all up to me to make it happen.
Wow.
No one was really going to be there with me. And I think that good and bad kind of carried me forward. And, just a couple highlights. I put myself through college. I wanted to become a broadcast journalist in my earlier days. I ended up working as a financial commentator in LA while I was working in my career in the financial industry, which I loved. And, just had some extraordinary experiences. But like a lot of people, I had challenges too.
It's amazing to have that big and profound a feeling when you're 12 years old that you had to be responsible for your own destiny. How did that influence you at such an early age with some of the early choices that you made career-wise?
Well, I was working like real jobs when I was pretty young. My first job was at the age of 14 as a maid in a motel. And, part of it was my mom did actually instill some really good habits about saving money and the gift club. And so I was working as a maid in a motel and I was buying my own gifts, but I was very much thinking also about putting myself through college. And, just also looking beyond my immediate family for sort of the role models and how to behave in the world, in the business world to get ahead. I was doing that a lot. Like I would just pay attention to how people were dressed and how they might behave. And I think picking up a lot of those clues, which, a little bit is kind of why we started Girls with Impact, to help young women have that kind of support.
So you've also had experience in politics, and talk about that time you spent in California on gubernatorial campaigns and what you did there.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. I was working for a pretty prominent elected official. Kathleen's father was a 2-time governor. Her brother was a 2-time governor. And I found myself in a very fortunate role at the age of 24, 25 as her press secretary running for state treasurer, so young. And, I was really, really fortunate because they didn't want to pay somebody a lot of money, but they wanted some experience. And I had a little bit. And you just dive in. But actually, former press secretary to Bill Clinton, Dee Dee Meyer, was my mentor,
That's
gave me a quick
amazing.
class on how to be a press secretary, and worked for Kathleen in the treasurer's office. And I found the issues extraordinarily interesting, from financial crises to college savings bonds to local elected officials to national conventions. It was
Mm.
incredibly interesting and exciting. On the far extreme, though, a really interesting way that I felt is I would be at these weekly team meetings with, the treasurer's executives. And because I was only 24 and hadn't really been prepared, I was actually very much afraid to speak.
Mm.
I was like afraid of my own shadow. I didn't trust what I had to say. And I would be in my head a lot, talking about, being confident. And it was very challenging.
Did you tell yourself you couldn't do things, or were you trying to psych yourself up to actually go and do things and say
To
things?
actually, and it wasn't about I was definitely doing the job, but it was
Yeah.
about, being in a room of people with more
Yeah.
experience. And I think, you know, kind of comparing myself, not feeling enough.
Mm.
And actually I was doing a good job in the role, but
Yeah.
it was just those moments where I'd be in a, boardroom, and we're going around the table talking about what's on deck for the week. And I would be afraid to speak. But those experiences, when you're, I think, most afraid or challenged or moving outside your comfort zone, is when you grow.
Mm.
And so, to your original question, when Kathleen ran for governor, I was asked to go over to the governor's campaign and run communications. And I was in a different mode at that
Mm.
time. I was so ready
Great.
and dove in, and it was a very different experience. And, people could see that. So, I think sort of the lesson is, when you're going through those moments and challenges, you will come through
Mm.
them, and you'll come through them in a better place. It's going to set you up for success.
Well, as someone who's known you now for several years, I would say I would never have imagined you were not, confident to speak what's on your mind, because I've always seen you doing that and really taking leadership. So I appreciate your taking us back to a time when that wasn't true and when you made that jump. I think that's phenomenal. So the theme of economics and self-sufficiency and women's empowerment clearly runs through your life and work. And I would love to talk about Girls with Impact. This is such an extraordinary organization. And at the root of it, you're teaching girls so young how to create business plans and start businesses. There's a lot of self-sufficiency there. There's a lot of economic empowerment there. Tell us why you felt so compelled to start that organization.
Yeah. I found myself at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and there were a lot of data and conversations about women coming into the workforce at 50-50 number. So today, 58% of the workforce is women. And as you move up the talent pipeline, as we know, women drop out for various reasons. But this had been a problem and an issue, Sam, that had been talked about literally for decades. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, the World Economic Forum still talks about how many over 100 years that it'll
Yes.
take for women having a true equality. And I was like, there's been enough talk about this. It's time to do something. And as you know, I had been in Silicon Valley and spent a lot of my career around this space. And I thought, what if, instead of trying to fix the issue in corporate America, and Jamie Dimon, by the way, is an incredible role model of how to embrace and bring women up. But what if instead we focus on the next generation and
Mm.
train them differently to lead from the top and to have those skills and that confidence that's so essential, but that have also been barriers to women, I think, being fully at their best when they do step into the workforce.
Mm. Mm.
And so we built what, we describe as a mini MBA, or a business and leadership training that is now the nation's leader. We deliver it live online for the most part. Some of our programs are in person, but really because it allows us to be scalable
Yes.
and to meet students and serve students from all backgrounds, no matter where they are. So it was interesting. Yesterday, I was at a meeting with a big financial institution with one of our graduates, and a top executive in the industry said, well, I'm not sure about this virtual thing, but my now 22-year-old young woman who went through the program at 15, who's African American, said, but, I got to tell you, like, I went through it. I was fully engaged. And, people who are 15, 16 years old don't have parents necessarily who can drive them someplace.
Right.
Or they might be in rural parts of
Of
America.
course.
So we can serve them. And so what we're trying to do, Sam, is level the playing field so that women of all backgrounds have an equal shot at success in the business world. But we are doing that by training them when they're really young.
Mm-hmm.
And the payoff of that and the ripple effect is so extraordinary because a state, just to give folks a feel, a state spends about $10,000 to train somebody for a job. We do it for like a tenth of that.
Amazing.
And the reason we do it for a tenth is partly our delivery model. But, the stories are just so extraordinary.
So tell us about what the experience is like. So if you're a girl going through
Yes.
Girls with Impact, what do you learn? How do you learn it? And at the end of the program, what are you expected to deliver?
Well, I'll talk about the Signature Academy program, which I think is the most exciting. It's pretty robust. It is a 10-week program that's generally an after school or outside of the college if you're in college. So we do have a 14 to 18 track and an 18 to 24. And this is a program that young women come into because they either want to really differentiate themselves, build leadership skills. Maybe they want to start something. This generation very much does. Any of those reasons. They'll hear about it through social media, maybe through a school, through their college system, maybe a community organization. And they will come in and over 10 weeks, they will bring an idea to life. They might have an inkling of an idea like a lot of us did when we were young. And a lot of them don't, but they'll spend the first couple weeks going through ideation. And the next 8 weeks or so, they will bring that idea to life, learning business fundamentals straight out of Harvard Business School. They'll be in a class of no more than 25, and they'll have an instructor, kind of like their mini professor, who is really dedicated to them. I mean, these people are extraordinary folks who have worked in business. They generally have business degrees, and they really care about this. So they will guide these 25 young women through, what is your unique value proposition? Who's your customer, taking them through competitive analysis. And at the end of it, they come out of it with a business plan, a venture pitch, and a prototype. Now that's like a venture pitch and a prototype.
They're teenagers, some of them,
They're
right?
teenagers.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
At one of your breakfasts, your annual breakfasts, I remember hearing from one of the girls in your program who really wanted to put together a platform for cancer survivors to provide a lot of resources for cancer survivors and their families.
Yes.
And it was built upon her own need, but clearly a need that so many others had. And I was just so moved and really impressed by what she's done. Tell me what you see girls actually doing with this in terms of getting into colleges, for example, and paying for school.
It's so crazy. So first off, they come out of it. We track a lot of data. They come out of it seeing themselves as a leader and a CEO. I've had fathers say, my daughter wanted to become a physical therapist. Now she wants to be a CEO. Like, it's your fault, Jen, but it's so great. I've had parents say, my daughter got a full ride to college because of you.
Wow.
I was, a few months ago, I was sitting in a taxi with one of our graduates from California, heading to a reception we were doing together. And I said, Anika, tell me, the program did help you in some way, right? She said, Jen, I got not one, not two, but 3 full ride offers to college, totaling nearly $1 million.
Incredible.
Incredible. That young woman is now at Johns Hopkins building out a venture called DevMind VR, which is a virtual reality solution for children with autism.
Oh, my goodness.
She probably will become an actual entrepreneur. Although we would say that, look at these young women are still very young and they don't have a lot of business experience. So the space that Girls with Impact is really owning is making sure they're ready to step into the business world and have an equal opportunity, right?
Yes.
So Anika, extraordinary story. There's so many, there was a woman, back to your point, a lot of real business leaders and entrepreneurs build ideas because of their personal experience, right? I had a young woman who a couple years ago heard from her classmates that they were worried their families were going to be deported because of all the talk around immigration.
Of course.
She built a platform to educate her fellow peers, youth, about what you should do if that happens. We got national and international press. Her mother was the primary breadwinner. And so when she got into Fordham University, she said, Jen, my mom couldn't afford it. $60,000 a year. Her mouth was dropping. She said, so I went to my second choice college. I pulled up my Girls with Impact business plan and venture pitch and showed them the press clips. She said the next day they gave me a check for $20,000,
Wow.
put me into the honors program, and gave me a seat on the mock UN. From there on, she got a full ride. We did her recommendation. She is now working at a major financial institution, right? I mean, and she would say, like, you changed my trajectory. And now she wants to pay it back. As she moves up the corporate ladder,
Yeah.
she'll certainly pay it back. I mean, the stories are so incredible. They range from about 50% of the student ventures have a STEMI focus.
Mm-hmm.
And then they cross on, environmental issues from recyclable straws we've seen to bralette businesses. Fathers might be involved in some of these ventures.
Oh, I love that.
The first time, Sam, about 7-8 years ago, when we had our first real cohort, we pulled them together. Every quarter, we graduate these young women. They get a certificate and they can move into our mentoring programs and so forth. But the first time we had like 30 of them up there sharing their venture business plans in just 2 minutes. And the parents there, my mouth was dropping because I knew we had something really extraordinary,
Yes.
super substantive, and will carry them and have so many impacts for.
I love that. That is so life-changing. I mean, literally, with what you're teaching them, where you're getting them. And whether or not they actually go into entrepreneurship, I think it's a full-time career. It's probably not even the point. It's what you're teaching in terms of those fundamental skills and the confidence. Do you think, though, is entrepreneurship a good place for women to be? What would you say to women who are thinking about where to go into for their careers? Is that something that's conducive to women? And do you think they can thrive in that?
I think they absolutely can. There's still some huge challenges for women, which is access to capital, as you know. So
Yes.
it's like over 200 billion in venture capitals doled out annually, and women get now, I think it went up from 2% to 6%. And if you're a woman of color, it is so tough. It is still
Yes.
an old boys network.
Barely moving.
That's my issue with it. And I do think that you're much better set up if you get real world business experience, because in working in the business world, that also is how you'll identify not only a good problem to solve through entrepreneurship, but also potential, partners to help you in that. And going it alone is, having done it myself, it is not, not always the best way to go. But, I shared with you, I was just on this morning before I came here with Lauren, who started Sweet Lauren's, which also started out of her own personal experience having Hodgkin's disease, wanting to find some alternative. She loves baking, created some recipes for chocolate chip cookie dough and other similar recipes, but using sort of the best in oils and flours for your body. And, now she is thriving, right? And wants to pay it forward. So,
Great.
yeah. So, I love entrepreneurship for women. It does provide flexibility, but I do think in the business world, they are hungry for women at all levels, which is why I think Girls with Impact serves a really important void. Companies are hungry for women up and down the talent pipeline, and companies of all backgrounds are really hungry for ready talent on day one. They're not getting it. 85% of employers say that first-time hires lack basic skills. And that's just really tough. So that's what we're trying to solve, but by focusing on women.
I'm excited to hear that so many focus on STEM in terms of their business plans. Do you think that carries through to them and makes them want to continue in the STEM fields? I would hope so, because we know we need women in those fields. And we also know that a lot of women get discouraged from STEM at those critical ages, right? At that high school age. So do you think this could help more women stay in those fields?
I do. And I think, I think the STEM fields can leave women in the doer versus leader position. And by the way, there's the role of doer and creator, whether you're an engineer or a programmer, is super important. But one of the incredible stories that we had is a young woman who was a coder. She was only 15 years old. It was during COVID. She's looking outside her window at people getting too close to each other. And she said, and her name is Neha. She said, if my grandparents back in India got that close, they would get COVID. I am going to program. She came into the Girls with Impact Business Academy. She created a venture called 6 Feet Apart, which is a wearable sensor device that zaps you if somebody comes within 6 feet.
That's great. A very COVID need.
Very COVID need. That girl will be a CEO. That girl now is at Duke University, wrote a book, has served an internship at NASA,
Oh my
and won the
goodness.
Lady Diana Award. Like, right? So that's what I mean. When you take somebody with any of these affinities for, particularly for STEM skills, and you give them this leadership and this business view and experience, they can just like skyrocket, right?
I love it.
So we do tell our young women, though, because those are such substantive, important roles dominated by men, I guide my instructors. If you see any opportunity to guide women to STEMmy areas with their venture project in the program, have them pursue those.
Oh, thank you. We need more encouragement
We do.
at those ages. What do you tell the parents, obviously critical players too in this, in terms of how they influence their daughters and children in general's careers? What do you talk to the parents about? And do you say anything different to the fathers who could also maybe sometimes be encouraged to boost their daughters' kind of prospects?
Well, you know, fathers are incredible advocates. And one of the things that I'm so excited about is fathers who are daughters, particularly if they're in business, they really get the need and the opportunity. They sometimes have stumbled across our programming and have brought their daughter into it.
I love that.
Incredible, right?
Yeah.
We try to also keep the parents apprised of what's happening during the academy experience with updates each week so that they can have a conversation with their daughter. Oh, honey, what is your marketing plan this week for your venture?
So asking the questions.
How did you survive the budgeting task? Because I know, JPMorgan Chase is so committed to, financial security. How did that experience go with you?
Yes.
So just such a great way for them to really engage. Because you look at parents, particularly working parents, they don't have time to think about all the things that they could or should be doing with their children. And so we can try to play a role with that.
I love that.
Yeah. So that's a good example.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, as sometimes I'm wondering too how to convey certain things to my kids. Being that you worked in politics and you were in a state and understood the importance of community to getting programs off the ground, how is Girls with Impact thinking about engaging with the community, working with other community partners to make sure you have the greatest impact you can?
Well, I see it, Sam, as a real 360 role and opportunity. We recruit through school systems, college systems, community organizations. We are engaging and serving families, particularly those of need. So all of the funds that we raise from companies or philanthropists enable those young women, low to moderate income, to go through it at no cost. But we are also really at the forefront of workforce readiness, which our employers want. So we are really focused on where we want to go is land these young women more ready for day one to our employers and to be ready, productive talent that also is driving innovation in our communities and in our companies. And so for policy leaders as well, we engage with them a lot. We'll do reports here and there. During COVID, we did a report called and a survey, what should a post-COVID economic recovery look like for women? What really do they need to thrive, because women dropped out of the workforce and needed different schedules and all sorts of things. So I also personally and the organization want to be a resource to those policy leaders on Gen Z, next generation. What are they thinking about? What are their priorities? They have a very different mindset in how they think about the workplace and how they think about how we interact and treat people. I hear it from my own daughters. Just yesterday, it was interesting. And that is a really important window for corporate leaders and policy leaders and how we educate and prepare them. And it's not just the work readiness, but the education system. The education system is now really getting focused on work readiness. Half of Americans don't go to college. And the majority, I think it's the majority of those who do go to college, and probably particularly community colleges, they don't finish. And so most people are going to go into the workplace not with a 4-year college degree. And by the way, a lot of jobs need people who don't necessarily need to have that 4-year degree. So, but as a leader said to me recently, you know, the educational system can't do it. They don't have the resources and the expertise to prepare these young women to step out of high school or step out of a college or community college and know how to land a job.
Yeah.
But I feel like we have such a responsibility to society to help them to do that, because your kids, my kids, they've gone through, you know, not only 20 years of education, but we as taxpayers have spent a lot of money preparing them. And so we need to make sure that they know how to manage that paycheck that they get, that we've spent so many years preparing them for, and that they can thrive for our companies. And America will be better off because it is a very competitive global world, as we know.
I'm getting more so. Did you learn anything new or surprising from the survey of women that you're doing now? Do people want different things out of the workplace than they used to? And what did you think you just learned that you hadn't known before?
A couple really good takeaways. One is this generation is really coachable. First off, they say that the majority of them want to be their own bosses, which means that in the workplace, they want to innovate. They actually want to be innovative and they want to feel valued. And so one way that we do that at Girls with Impact is we try to have each team member feel like they're the CEO of their own domain.
Love that.
And but yet some of them are young and they need coaching. They actually really do thrive on the coaching. It's how you do it. I don't have a lot of patience, but other folks on my they really like learning. They also want respect in the workplace. It's very interesting. When they're looking to take a job, they are looking for certain things online. And this is why your talent brand matters. They're looking for women in leadership roles and
where they
people,
can see it visually.
And people of color in leadership roles.
Yep.
If they feel like women and people of color are not respected, no matter who they are, they will pick up on it and they will be turned off. It's a pretty strong, so in our research, we found that was a big shift during COVID, by the way. They still care about they all care about being successful on the job, but they are much more mindful of racism and equal treatment. They also, I guess the other thing too is they do value older people. They're looking for them to be mentors to them. One of the interesting things about women who are already in the workplace is it's something like 60% of them are not comfortable asking for a mentor or a sponsor. I think one of the things that I'm sure we'll see with our own graduates is that as they move into the business world, well, first off, they can get mentors through us, but they'll be more confident asking for that, right?
Yes, which is so important.
Yeah, and there's so much wisdom to pass down from older folks, and I know a lot of companies like jpmorgan Chase are mindful of that, right? Passing that wisdom to the next generation. Skills transference is a key word.
Yeah, we think a lot about sponsorship and mentorship. I've talked to a lot of women about the importance of finding a sponsor in particular to really help propel them through their careers. But also we talk to a lot of men to be more and better sponsors to women and to people of color. I think that's such a critical ingredient. When you look at the most successful people in organizations, you can see that sponsorship hand guiding them and really helping them. So I'm glad you're really coaching women to do that and know that kind of early on. I wish it's something I wish I learned more about early on. So let's talk about financial literacy for a minute and the importance of women really being comfortable with their financial health. You've wrote several books, including The Socially Savvy Advisor and The Millionaire Zone. And I'm wondering what compelled you to write them and what messages were you trying to convey?
Well, one of the books was from my earlier days. It was called What's Your Net Worth, turned into a public television show. And it was based on having been in the space of women and their money, right, with my first venture. But one of the things, Sam, that I really discovered when I was in Silicon Valley, this is when the internet was taking off. Okay. It was the gold rush days. And I was meeting major VC firms for the first time. It's pretty exciting. But I was also looking at how they were networking. And it was a boys' club for the most part. It is. But I thought, how are they doing it? And so after I sold Women's Financial Network, I did a book called The Millionaire Zone. And I conducted some research because I actually wanted to understand how are the wealthy, what are they doing that everybody else needs to know?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a couple takeaways, and some of it sounds like obvious, but the fact is that most people don't do it. So one of the things they do is they, much more than people who are non-millionaires, they take advantage of the people, places, and things around them, right around them to get to where they want to go. So a good example might be, I've got a business idea. I want to get it going. I don't know where to go. Oh my gosh, where do I go? Who do I talk to? I'm thinking all over the place. Rather than there's somebody in my church and synagogue who's been an expert in retail products that I might talk to. That's what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a huge difference, by the way.
Huge difference in mindset.
Right.
And I actually very much think about that all the time. It has helped me to build this organization.
So using that network, understanding the resources available to you, even if you feel like you don't have them, trying to understand what you can actually do with the people in space around you.
Yes. And then when you're with somebody, and this goes also when you're job hunting, I have literally like 3 or 4 people right now who've been coming to me. They're looking, and most of them are younger. One is in his 50s, trying to land. And, if you're doing meetings, informational meetings with anybody, asking them, are there a couple people that you think I should get myself in front of or get my information in front of because I'm interested in X, Y, and Z. So there's always something to gain or to learn from being with other people that I think is going to generally help you move forward. So that was one of the big takeaways. I also did some research about how people, how do they most build their wealth? Is it entrepreneurship, real estate, saving money?
Yeah.
All of those play really big roles. In the Girls with Impact program, we're helping them to understand finances by actually applying it to their own ventures, right? So we have them do a budget, learn budgeting software, and it really sets them up for success when they're earning that first paycheck.
Oh, I bet. And you can't start too young with that. So tell us about the future for Girls with Impact. Where do you hope it goes? And is there anything new on the horizon?
So we've served 16,000 young women.
Incredible.
Isn't that?
That is
pretty
scale.
exciting.
That is fantastic.
Pretty exciting.
Congratulations.
And I have to say, it's not like a one-time workshop, right?
Right,
It's pretty
right,
substantive. Now we're taking that 16,000 to 50,000 over the next 3 to 4 years.
Incredible.
We're bringing She Leads business clubs into high school campuses, which I'm really excited about because I think that's just a great introduction to leadership skills. It's a great leadership opportunity for young women, and it fills a gap. And we're also building a career accelerator for young women who are in the 18 to 24-year-old space. They're maybe walking into an internship or their first job. They need those executive skills to function and be successful in that first job. Where we want to take it longer term is, I would love every business leader to be behind what we do, philanthropists. Melinda Gates said it, when you're investing in women, you're investing in everybody else.
Yeah.
This is not just the lives of these young women, but the ripple effect is just huge for us. And so we built this to scale, and $1 million is certainly possible easily. We're just limited by, funding capacity. So there you have it. It's been a really exciting run, but we've just gotten started.
It feels that way, but I love the momentum. You've also had experience in politics in the state of California. Tell us about your experiences there.
Well, while I was in college, I was working in the Los Angeles City Controller's office, and then I had an incredible opportunity at about 25 to become the press secretary to Kathleen Brown, who became our state treasurer. She's the daughter of former Governor Pat Brown, 2-term governor, and sister to Jerry Brown.
Yep.
Incredible experience, right? Working on things from budget crises to college savings bond programs, and then transferring over to her campaign and running the communications office there. And what an experience to see so many activities, actions in real time, but also understanding how to move at such a lightning speed, on a campaign.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, that's a really formative experience to have at such a young age. But the communications background, does that serve you even to this day? How would you say the skills you learned there really transferred even now?
Sam, I use those skills all the time. A lot of people today are focused on storytelling, right?
Yes,
and I would
yes,
say, and
they're
everybody
right.
in the office would say, I'm the chief storyteller. I'm
Yes.
focused on the content. And, writing and being able to tell very concisely the impact of a story. I mean, for these young women, for example, it ranges from the young women who came into our program and who said she stuttered, and it helped her overcome that,
Oh,
to the
incredible.
young woman who had an idea and didn't know how to get started,
Mm.
to the young woman who said she sat in the back of the classroom and now, she feels more powerful 3 weeks into the program, right? So,
Love it.
but being able to articulate those stories so that we can, recruit and impact more women, just it serves us well.
So when you were in the financial services business, you recognized real disconnect between that industry and women. And so you founded the Women's Financial Network. What was that, and what were you trying to accomplish?
Well, what I realized, Sam, the internet was just coming into being. And I realized that women were increasingly becoming the breadwinner, but they were
Mm,
not taking action on their money. They were not going to places like a Yahoo Finance or a MarketWatch where they could learn about it.
yeah.
And they were not going to online brokerage firms or brokerage firms in general. But at the same time, what was happening, percolating, is I was the financial commentator for CBS TV in LA. And I would get up at 5:30 in the morning, go on set, do my shtick talking about mutual funds or credit cards. But a funny thing happened. I would walk off the set and women in the station would come up to me and start asking me questions about their money. Jen, my boyfriend wants to borrow money. What should I do? Jen, I just got an inheritance. What should I do?
Mm.
So that really led me to look at the trends of women with their money. And that then led me to start this idea of Women's Financial Network to bring the education together with the ability to take action, whether you're going to do it yourself or work with a financial advisor.
And did you teach certain things through this, or you have the community, the network itself, teach women?
We provided both educational content on all the big money topics from mortgages to credit, debt, saving, budgeting, tools to take action on that, and then the options to actually invest and save your money. So
Mm.
whether it was working through our online brokerage firm or finding a financial advisor who really cared about making sure that you were, treated and taken care of with your money objectively.
So, Jen, given what you've accomplished in your career and what you're teaching, I'm sure you've now combined your life lessons, your best practices for women in the workplace. What would you tell them to do? What are your tips for success?
I think number one is don't go it alone. I made that mistake because I felt like that was the only way. That was right, sort of my model. But now in building this organization, and even if you're looking to build your career, having somebody alongside you, your own board of directors, somebody who's your go-to to talk things out, strategy. We all face difficult moments where how we communicate, what we say, the action we take can really impact our trajectory. The other piece of advice is to make the ask.
Mm.
Make the ask. I had a young woman, one of our program graduates, who said that she used to think before Girls with Impact that if she had an idea, she had to give it to somebody else, her professor or a man. I can't believe that, right?
Oh, no.
But make the ask. And making the ask could be, I think I have the skills to do that job. If you don't make the ask, no one's ever going to know. But a great story is that after I had sold Women's Financial Network, I knew I was going to start something again, but I didn't have the next it. I was still just barely percolating on ideas. And I thought, maybe a good move for me will be to go work back in corporate America to get
Mhm.
some experience. And so I sent out cold letters for the most part to some CEOs with major banks in America. And I talked briefly about what I could bring. I understand the women's market, Silicon Valley technology, something like that. And I got an email back or a request for a meeting with Jamie Dimon. Wow.
Love hearing this.
Wow. I mean, oh my gosh. And he was then the CEO of Bank One in Chicago. I was living in LA. And I remember standing outside his office and I was kind of shaking my head saying, Jen, I can't believe it. I mean, but it was making the ask that did it. And by the way, Jamie has done that similar thing to somebody else that I know, a young man who worked for the bank for many years. And but making the ask, you have to put yourself out there, or people don't know where you want to go. Could be raising money for your business, all sorts of ways that comes into play.
Well, let me follow up on that and ask, when you do make the ask and you don't get, how do you feel? I think that's what people are so afraid of, that rejection. How do you take that rejection in and just keep moving for the next one?
I think you have to be ready for rejection. And actually, that's something that we actually do bring into the Girls with Impact programming, because the world is about dealing with rejection. I mean, salespeople are
Yes,
rejected
all day.
90% of the time. Somebody said to me recently that, Jen, for every yes, you probably had 5 no's. And I'm just, I did grow up in a gritty experience, very gritty, kind of had to roll up the sleeves. And I do think that that kind of experience, that grittiness is important for everybody in all walks of life, which is why I think Girls with Impact, the value comes in the challenge. Every class, every learning of stuff that comes straight out of a major business school is challenging, but in executing tough things, you grow your confidence and you learn to deal with tough things. So I just think that's fundamental if you want to be successful.
So Jen, if people want to learn more about Girls with Impact and get involved, what should they do?
Well, first off, Sam, I'd love folks to make us a part of their philanthropic giving, large or small. They can underwrite a girl or do much more and be part of this campaign to impact 50,000. Certainly, they can mentor young women. Finally, I think one of the most exciting opportunities is to share the program with your community and network.
Yeah.
You might have a niece, a daughter, a granddaughter, neighbors who are part of the Boys and Girls Club whose children, young women 14 to 24, could benefit. The program gives them a huge competitive edge and they can participate at no cost. And so if they go to girlswithimpact.org, you can find more information. We essentially are recruiting throughout the entire school year and summer.
That's great. So Jen, thank you so much for being here and talking with us. It is just a pleasure to know you, to really see the organization evolve, and we wish you just the best. Continued luck.
Well, thank you for your support, Sam, and for that of jpmorgan Chase. We so appreciate it, and we wouldn't be here without you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Jennifer Openshaw. I love what she has built with Girls with Impact, what she is teaching to girls and women in terms of entrepreneurship and how to succeed in the workforce is truly powerful. If you've enjoyed this episode, please follow it on your favorite podcast platform and also share with others. I hope today that you learned something that will help you to lead with purpose.